I thank you so much for being here today. This is obviously a new topic for us. It's a new day here at Preferred EAP and in the world as we are continuing to try to vaccinate the general population, and as expected, encountering lots of vaccine hesitancy, but also lots of people who are getting vaccinated. So it's really an interesting time, and I think it will be evolving. And so this topic, or this that we're going to be talking about today, will be evolving. So I know some of you may have attended the webinar that was conducted by Dr. Vrablik, where he provided a lot of information about the vaccine, and I think it was really well attended. So to me, that speaks to how interested people are in having good information about the vaccines. This webinar is not going to be so much focused on information about the vaccine. It's more about the impact that the divide between the vaccinated and non-vaccinated the impact that can have in the workplace and in your personal life, right? When some of the guidelines have come out by the CDC where vaccinated individuals can do this and non-vaccinated individuals can't do that, and I started to get concerned about the amount of conflict that might cause among employees, because obviously not everybody is vaccinated. So one of the things we all have to be thinking about is how are we going to navigate that divide, because it is likely to be here for a period of time, and even going in, long into the future. For those who just have made the decision not to get vaccinated, we're going to have to continue to navigate those differences. So that's what this webinar is about today. And I wanted to start with just a few polling questions just to kind of get an idea of where you are as an audience. So I'm going to ask Tyler to launch the first question. What do you think is the biggest reason for vaccine hesitancy? And you can go ahead and select. We'll keep it open for a second. What do you think is the biggest reason for vaccine hesitancy? Okay. Let me see. Am I seeing the? Okay, I didn't have my whole question open. I need to open that to see where we are. Okay. Just give it one more second. And I really would love to hear from everybody about what you think is the biggest reason for vaccine hesitancy. This is, and you may actually think there's a couple of reasons, but I'm really curious about what you think is the biggest reason. Okay, we have about 71%. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at the responses. Okay, it looks like fear of side effects, most people feel, is the biggest reason for vaccine hesitancy. Lack of trust in the government and institutions is next, and then followed by 10%, lack of information about the vaccine, belief that COVID-19 risk is inflated, and political beliefs, okay? And that is fairly consistent with what we are seeing. There are a lot of the folks, and this is one of the reasons why information is important, because there are a lot of folks that have fear of the side effects. So that's actually good news that that's the primary fear, because we actually can educate people about that. Let's move on to the next question. Have you experienced conflict at work related to the COVID-19 vaccine? Oh, I love that we're getting even more people voting for this one. Okay. All right, great. Oh, that's very interesting. Let's go ahead and take a look at the results. It looks like it's completely divided. About 50% say yes and 50% say no, which is one of the reasons we are doing this webinar, right? Because We know there is a segment of people who are experiencing conflict related to the vaccine, whether it's because they've decided to get vaccinated or they've decided not to get vaccinated. Let's do one more poll question. Have you experienced conflict in your personal life related to the COVID-19 vaccine? Just give them one more second. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look. Once again, evenly divided, which is really interesting, right? You know, for some, I know for me personally, I have experienced some conflict in my personal life related to not really so much the vaccine, but just the approach to COVID-19, how, you know, the best way to take care of ourselves and our family when it comes to COVID-19. Fortunately for me, I did not experience any conflict with my kids. We can move on to the next slide. I think it's going to be a video, but before we play that, I'll just comment on that. So, you know I have not been fortunate not to experience conflict at work, but certainly in my personal life. But as I travel and I interact with people, I'm hearing more and more stories related to conflict that they are experiencing in both places, work and home. I just went and got my hair cut the other day, and the guy who cuts my hair was wearing a mask, but he was vaccinated, and he was having this whole conversation with me about the individuals that in the salon that aren't getting vaccinated, and if he thinks he's going to wear a mask, if they think he's going to wear a mask because they don't want to get back. There was this whole thing about, you know, them versus us and us versus them. And so it's really, really important for us to begin to contemplate, how are we going to navigate this divide and these differences? So, you know, when we talk about vaccine hesitancy, what we're really talking about is behavior change. How do we influence people's behavior? What would make somebody decide to get vaccinated that currently does not want to get vaccinated, right? We're really speaking about, how do we influence behaviors? And so I thought it would be interesting to start with just reflecting on other public health concerns that we've addressed as a whole, and how have we approached them, what has worked, what hasn't worked. So this video that Tyler's going to launch for me is by Dan Ariely. He is a social scientist at Duke University. And if you look at any of his work, he wrote a book called Predictably Irrational. He studies human behavior and what we can do to influence human behavior in a positive way. So I'm going to go ahead and let Tyler launch the video. If for some reason you're having a hard time hearing it, please put it in the chat so that Tyler can help you. Thanks so much. Go ahead, Tyler. Thanks, Tyler. So we'll move on, go back to so before I move on, Tyler, you can move on to the next slide and we'll just have that up. It's a very small group today, and I would love to hear from folks. If you're willing to unmute yourself, I'm just really curious about your reaction to that video and thinking about vaccine hesitancy. And what Dan Ariely is talking about is all those indirect paths. He said a couple of things that I think are really notable. It's doing the right thing for the wrong reasons, right? It's like a lot of behavior change is associated with doing the right thing, but not for the reasons that most of us would like to see, but for maybe a completely different reason. So I'm just curious, I think you have the ability to unmute yourself. Is that right, Tyler? I think folks do. Does anybody have any comments or questions or thoughts or reactions to that? And I won't pause for too long because I know sometimes people are reticent to talk on these. Okay. Okay, well, if you have any comments, please put it in the questions or in the chat. I would really love to hear your experiences. We'll pause again at the end. And so there's an opportunity for us to have a discussion, right? So one of the reasons I like that video is because I think it is important for us to really, number one, be honest with ourselves. Like he said, we have to admit that just knowledge enough, information and knowledge is not enough to stimulate behavior change. And at times we over focus on education, and then we get frustrated and angry when people aren't responding to that education, right? So we really need to think about all these indirect paths that we need to set up in order to promote behavior change, in order to encourage people to do the right thing in terms of their own well-being. Well, what do we know? Let me just start with what we know doesn't work with regard to behavior change. Browbeating and getting in somebody's face and shaming them for not getting vaccinated or shaming them for not wearing a mask. We know these things don't work, right? When you engage in that kind of behavior with somebody, the natural response that we all have is to defend ourselves, right? And to become more deeply entrenched in our behavior. So we know that browbeating is not the way to go. Really villainizing, he talked about the fact that we villainized smoke, secondhand smoke, not so much the smokers, villainize the secondhand smoke. We have to be careful about villainizing people based on their decisions regarding vaccines, right? We need to switch to looking at the decision, not the person, right? And that takes some intentional action on our part. What do we know contributes to behavior change? Well, information does make a difference, but it really needs to be from a trusted source. And that is really important because, I mean, how many times have you said, I've heard that 100 times, but it's not until you heard it from somebody that you really trust that it made an impact, right? That trust is critical. And that's probably why Dr. Vrablik had such a great turnout, because he's a trusted source, right? He's not invested in anything except educating and providing you with the proper information. So many people would view him as a trusted source. Our primary care doctors we view as a trusted source. Our family members, we don't automatically trust our employer. Hopefully you do, but that's not an automatic. We can't assume that the employer, if we're providing information, that the employees trust it. Right? So that's really critical, is to think about how we can provide information, but build trust. It has to be something that people can trust. Let's think about motivation for a moment. I know that I'm hearing a lot about providing incentives to people to get vaccinated. There's been a lot of conversation about, do we give them gift cards? Do we give them this? Do we give them that? Do we give them a day off? Do we give them, like, all kinds of conversation about what motivates people, right? Well, what's really critical in understanding motivation is knowing what motivates you, right? Because what motivates you may not motivate me. So it really does require a connection, right? I have a very, very close friend who has not gotten vaccinated, partly because she has not vaccinated her children either for medical reasons, because her eldest son, when vaccinated, nearly died from a reaction to the vaccine. And so she made the decision to get medical support to not vaccinate any of her kids. Well, so she's just never really been a vaccinator. It's just never been her thing. And now, I had a conversation with her, are you going to get the vaccine, or not? And she said, I wasn't going to get the vaccine, but her niece, who's a family member, wants her to visit because her niece had a new baby, and the niece doesn't want her to come unless she's vaccinated, right? So there's motivation, right? So that also speaks to the third bullet point, friction, right? So before, she was just like, it's not really going to impact my life that much if I don't get vaccinated. I'll wear a mask if I need to. It's not that big of a deal. But now it's a big deal, right? Because she was starting to experience some friction, some pushback, and now she's motivated. And it began with just feeling motivated to reflect on, why am I not getting vaccinated? What am I concerned about? What is my worry? And to really fully reflect on her decision. And before she just went forward with, I'm not getting vaccinated, right? She really had to take that time to reflect on it. And, for many people, that is going to be what motivates them. So back to the guy who was cutting my hair, he said that he had a conversation with one of the gals who didn't want to get vaccinated. And she said, well, does that mean that I have to wear a mask all the time? And he said, yeah, pretty much. You'll have to wear a mask all the time. And then once she realized that, it created some friction. And then she started thinking, maybe I will get vaccinated. But again, it's not the information per se that got her to change her mind. It was coming up against a boundary, a barrier, something that caused her to reflect more strongly on her decision. And I have another client who's in a similar situation, does not want to get vaccinated, is going to be working in a school district that is going to require vaccinations. And he's like, what do I do? How do I handle that? And it's creating some internal turmoil for him, and it's causing him to reflect, on his behavior and make a decision based on external factors, the friction that is going to come from his decision to not vaccinate while working in a community where the social norm, which is the fourth bullet point, will be, to work here, you need to be vaccinated, right? So these are ways that we can, begin to impact behavior without being directly in somebody's face and creating and villainizing them for their decision, right? We need to be thinking, these are all those indirect ways. When it comes to, friction, let's think about one of the barriers that we've had with vaccines is accessibility, right? So what did we do? We reduced friction in underserved communities. We went out to the community to provide vaccines so that they didn't have to go to great lengths in order to get it, right? That's one way that we reduce friction so that it's easier to make the decision to get vaccinated. And there are lots of examples of that when you look at how we are approaching, vaccine hesitancy. It does often involve friction, either creating some friction. I was watching the news the other day, and it was scrolling across the bottom. It said University of Pennsylvania will require all employees to get vaccinated. Well, that creates some friction for individuals who have made the decision not to get vaccinated. Doesn't ultimately mean that they will decide to get vaccinated, right? It's not forcing them to get vaccinated. It's creating a boundary. It's creating a social norm that then that individual has to decide, do I change my approach? Do I make a different decision? Or how important is it to me? Do I stick with what I believe? And so this is, how we have to be thinking about how we influence behavior, right? It has to go so much farther beyond information, right? We've got to be thinking in these terms. You can move to the next slide, Tyler. So what happens when conflict does arise, right? Because we can do our best to approach vaccine hesitancy in the ways that I described, but conflict is likely to occur, right, at the individual level. So let's just start with a definition of conflict, just a general definition. When does conflict occur? It occurs when one person has a need from something, for something or from someone, and that need isn't being met, right? It's when there is a gap and somebody needs something and they're not getting it, right? Now that could be, if we put it in terms of vaccine hesitancy, I as a vaccinated person might need to feel safe in the work environment. So I have a need to know that the people around me are truly vaccinated or wearing a mask if they're not. That's my need for safety, right? Somebody who has made the decision not to get vaccinated due to fear of side effects, they need to feel safe as well, right? They don't want to feel pressured into getting vaccinated because they're afraid of the side effects. And so they also have a need to feel safe and take care of themselves, right? This is really important for us to reflect on. When a conflict occurs, the very first thing we should be thinking is, what are the needs that are not being met? You can move to the next slide. So what are the steps involved, right, in resolving this conflict? Well, the first thing we need to focus on is expressing the unmet need. Unfortunately, we avoid this step often in conflict resolution. We try to jump right to the solution, or we avoid the conversation, right? A lot of this depends on your style of conflict resolution. If you're somebody who is really confrontational, you're going to go right in, and you're going to say, no, we're going to do it this way. If you're somebody who avoids conflict, you'll probably just, not want to have the conversation at all, and you may just give in, right, to whatever and everybody else wants, right? So we have to be aware of our style of conflict resolution first and foremost, because if we skip this step of the unmet need, then the conflict is going to escalate. We've all had that experience of maybe talking to a spouse, a partner, a child, a friend, and we're expressing a need to them and we don't feel like they hear us, right? What happens in that situation? We naturally escalate. We repeat ourselves. We say it again and louder and more emphatically. That's what happens when we have an unmet need. The conflict, or we feel as though we're not being heard, right? And being heard does not equal getting our way, right? It's different. It's just acknowledging that I have a need. And I think that's really important when it comes to vaccine hesitancy. We saw that everyone has a slightly different perspective on why somebody might not get vaccinated. We've got to spend time on that with those individuals. We got to acknowledge the need that they have that is influencing their decision, right? That's really important. Well, then the next step is to determine, can that need be met? If it can be met, then conflict resolves, right? If the need cannot be met, let's say somebody who's not vaccinated, they feel that they should be able to come to work even though it's a requirement and not wear a mask, right? Maybe that's their need, that need may not be able to be met. right? Because of thinking of the broader well-being of the group. So in that situation, that's when the negotiation begins, right? And if that escalates, then that might be a time to bring in a third party, somebody who can help, with seeing both sides of the equation, the employer side, the employee side, sometimes, and that's often the role that we play at Preferred EAP. We're often the third party to help people navigate these conflicts. But it's really important not skip that crucial first step, right? You can move to the next slide. So how do we, what I always tell people is, there's like, what do I do if they're really, feel really strongly about something? And I always say, you listen, be curious. We need curiosity, right? We often walk around making too many assumptions that are unchecked. We assume we understand why people are doing what they're doing. We assume that we fully understand what they're saying, that we're taking in their words exactly as they intend. And unfortunately, when it comes to communication, about 95% of the time we get it wrong, right? Why? Because when you're talking to me, when you're telling me something, it's going through my filter, right? I have my own filter that is based on my life experiences. So you may think that what you're saying is very clear, but once it goes through my personal filter, it gets distorted, right? And so we need to spend a lot more time being curious. How are you hearing what I'm saying? What is it like for you to hear what I'm saying? How are you reacting to what I'm saying, right? Tell me more about your experience. Tell me more about, what is influencing your decision, right? Be curious, listen with curiosity. That's how we begin. And the other thing that's really important is listening with curiosity begins with a core belief that everybody is doing the best they can, that everybody is well-intended. That's the baseline, right? People aren't automatically, with few exceptions, people aren't automatically trying to do the wrong thing or to upset us or, to make us angry. That's not the automatic. People are speaking from their needs. First and foremost, they're speaking from their needs. So we need to be very curious. You can move to the next slide. The other thing that is so important is empathy and compassion, right? It's, for somebody who is afraid of getting the vaccine because maybe in the past they've had a bad reaction to medicine or a negative experience when it comes to the medical field, and they're really afraid, right? We need to convey empathy. That's a difficult position to be in when you're facing in the future maybe a requirement to get vaccinated in order to work at a particular setting. That's tough. That's a tough position to navigate, right? So we've got to approach these individuals with empathy and compassion, right? It's so important, right? We can't, and again, doing that does not automatically mean that everyone is going to get their way. It's not what it's about. It's about not pushing people away, right? Because the more we push people away, the greater the divide, the more entrenched we become in our behavior, right? We need to focus on how do we build a connection. Remember that trust is the most critical element when it comes to information and education. It has to come from a trusted source. Well, if you don't listen with curiosity, if you don't convey empathy and compassion, guess what? You are not going to be a trusted source, right? It is just going to increase the divide. You can move to the next slide. So I want to just kind of go over this style of communication, non-distancing communication. is something that a psychologist named Marshall Rosenberg sort of pioneered and spoke a lot about. And he didn't just, advocate for this. He practiced this, and not just on a small scale, but even at the level of working with countries, in conflict, right? How do we communicate when we are experiencing a conflict, right? Because that is the most challenging time for us to communicate. So these are some of the, and you can learn so much more, and I encourage you to investigate this style of communication. There's lots of great podcasts about, it's actually referred to as nonviolent communication, but I always felt like that violence sort of turned off. So I kind of refer to it as non-distancing, because it's communication that keeps us close rather than pushes us away from each other, right? And it begins with observations, right? I notice that you are reluctant to get the vaccine, right? I'm concerned about that because I care about you. Notice feelings, express your feelings. What am I feeling due to that? It's making me anxious because I enjoy spending time with you, and I notice that you're hesitant to get the vaccine. How are you feeling about it, right? Making the observation, observing the behavior. This is what I notice. This is what I see. What are the feelings that are associated with that behavior? What am I feeling? What are you feeling, right? And then contemplating needs. What do you need in order to feel confident about getting vaccinated? What do you need? What do I need from you in order to be able to spend time with you or to work side by side with you if you've decided not to get vaccinated, right? Talking about needs. And then making or inviting requests. And this is often where communication goes wrong, right? Because instead of requests, we have that tendency to make demands. We demand certain things. We demand, that you behave in a certain way, that you make that change, right? Instead of inviting requests. What requests would I have about working with somebody who's not vaccinated? What's my request? Well, my request might be, I would like for you to wear a mask when you're around me, because you're not vaccinated and I am, and I would really like, that would make me feel safer, more comfortable. It's inviting a request, right? And making a request instead of making a demand, right? And often, this is the negotiation phase of communication. This is where there might be a lot of back and forth, right? Now, how do you know if it's a request versus a demand? Well, if I ask somebody to do something and they say, no, I'm really not comfortable with that, and I have a strong emotional reaction and it makes me really angry and upset, there's a good chance that I was making a demand, not a request, right? Because when you make a request, that person may not always respond to that request. They may not always be willing to take that action. So this is where the back and forth goes on, where you have to continue to look at requests and then obtain feedback. How does that feel to you? What are your thoughts about that? What will that be like for you? What will that be like for me, right? That feedback part is where we have an opportunity to clarify. Like if I'm making a request and it seems like that the individual is getting upset, I can obtain feedback. Are you feeling upset about what I'm asking? It seems like you're going back to observations. It seems like you're having a reaction to what I'm asking. What's going on? What is it that you need from me? How are you hearing what I'm saying, right? This is the hard work of communication. And the parts of communication that we often overlook, that we skip, we go right from the observation to the demand, right? And then when the demand isn't met, then we distance ourselves, right? So in order for us to navigate this very tricky time of vaccine hesitancy, we have to be willing to stay in it, right? We have to have, there's some really interesting research on distress tolerance. Research that measures how long somebody can hold their breath, right? And the longer you can hold your breath, it's an indication of distress tolerance, which is really interesting, right? We have to really increase our distress tolerance because we have to stay in these really challenging conversations, right? And not retreat to, anger and resentment and demonizing and villainizing people. We've got to stay in it because we're in this for the long haul, right? This is not going away. And what's most important is that we stay connected even when we disagree, right? That is really, really important because if we don't stay connected, then we're never going to solve this problem, right? We're never going to get where we want to go. So let me see, you can move to the next slide. Let me see if that's it. Oh, okay, I do have one more slide. So what are some of the most common mistakes we make when it comes to communication? Well, we have a tendency to focus on who's right. A lot of the conversation is about I'm right, you're wrong, right? And I hear that when it comes to vaccine hesitancy, I'm right and you're wrong. Like, you're wrong for making that decision and I'm right, you're doing the wrong thing. We've got to switch out. We can't frame things as right or wrong because it's right for that person based on their life experience, based on their needs, based on their fears, anxieties, right? It's right for that person. It may not be right for you, right? So the whole dynamic of who's right and who's wrong, you're never going to get anywhere with that. Never, right? Because it's right for you and it's right for them, but your rights do not look the same. We make a mistake when we don't identify that unmet need. I got to go back to that time and time again. We've got to focus on what is the underlying need. Behavior is not random. Behavior is connected to needs, right? We behave in a way to address an underlying need. And so the first job for all of us is to understand what is that unmet need. And this is again, this is a big problem with communication is we tend to personalize way too much. When someone is angry and upset and we take it personally and we think it's because of us, I did something wrong, we personalize it, then we derail the communication because now we've taken full responsibility for somebody else's anger, right? And it's not your problem, right? People have to take personal responsibility for what they are experiencing. And it's important for you to not take it personally. When someone disagrees with you, don't take it personally. Be curious. Be curious about why they're disagreeing with you. What is fueling that? What is the need? Be careful about using judgmental language. And I see this a lot. People saying like, well, you're not getting vaccinated because you don't care about anybody but yourself, right? You don't care about the welfare of the group, so you're not getting vaccinated. I'm hearing these things and I'm witnessing these things. Or you're violating my personal rights, or you're being too intrusive, or you're, trying to control me by making me get vaccinated, right? This is judgmental language. And when we use that type of language, there's no way around it. It's going to increase the divide. People are going to get defensive. They're going to become entrenched, and it cuts off that communication, right? We also make a mistake when we're only thinking about our own need, when the conversation is only about getting our own need met, right? That is not communication. Communication involves two people, each have their own needs, right? And when we only focus on our own need, then we don't put ourselves, it makes it so much more challenging to resolve the problem, right? We have to acknowledge needs on both sides. So I want to close with one more slide. Tyler, if you can move on. I love this, this quote because I think it really speaks to what we all need to be focused on right now. People will forget what you said People will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And I'm sure we can all speak to that. We've all had those experiences where someone has made us feel really bad or really upset or uncared for or disrespected or whatever terminology you want to use. We have to be careful about that going forward when it comes to, the vaccine hesitancy. At a minimum, we want to make sure people feel respected, even though they disagree. For whatever reason, you may not agree at all with their rationale, for not getting vaccinated, but it's their rationale, and we've got to convey to them that we respect them as individuals. We may not agree with their decision, right? And so again, addressing that hesitancy, we've got to go back to what social scientists have known forever, right? It's not about information. It's not about getting in someone's face. It's about setting up structures, setting up unique situations that motivate people, that maybe create some friction or reduce friction to make it easier to get vaccinated, or maybe to cause them to really think maybe it's better if I get vaccinated, right? Because I don't want to wear a mask all the time. Maybe providing that information from a trusted source so that people can overcome their fears, right, and anxiety. I mean, really, ultimately, the number of people who are just waiting, they want to see, they have that wait and see attitude. I've talked to many people who are like that. Information isn't going to do anything because they're in a wait and see pattern, right? They want to see the science, how the science evolves. There's a lot of people who feel that way, right? Well, they may change their mind if it becomes so disruptive to their life, that that it makes more sense to get vaccinated than to not be vaccinated, right? So we've got to be thinking in those terms. What sort of boundaries do we feel we need to set? What type of structures do we need to be in place? And then we have to allow people to reflect on their decisions based on those boundaries. That's what boundaries are for. Boundaries create tension, right? And tension causes us to reflect on our behavior, right? Do I want to do this or not do this? Just like my friend who ultimately made the decision to get vaccinated. Why? Because she really wants to see her niece and her niece's baby. And she couldn't come up with a good enough reason for her to not get vaccinated, right? But it took that little bit of tension for her to pause and reflect and self-evaluate on a deeper level, to go a little deeper with her decision making, and that's how she came out. Well, she could have just as easily said, you know what, I feel really strongly about this, and I guess we'll just have to do virtual visits because I feel so strongly about this that I'm not going to get vaccinated. Again, it's the boundary, it's the friction, it's the social norms that create that motivation for us. So those are the terms that we want to be thinking in. You can move to the final slide. That's all I have for you today. I would love to hear from you. Does anybody have any questions, concerns, comments, anything? I would love to hear from you. It looks like there is. Oh, Meg posted some things here. Let's see. All right, so I'm going to try to read these. The people in my agency who aren't getting vaccinated have relied on non-scientific sources for their decision. Example of reasons: I'm not putting that stuff in my body. I don't know what it will do to me short or long term, so I'll take my chances with COVID. COVID is no worse than the flu. That is something I've definitely heard a lot of, and I'll address that in a second. Question from registration: coping with COVID aftermath in the workplace, readjusting without fear. As workplaces move back on site, hybrid environments, how can a company create an emotionally safe environment with a variety of people and different journeys? Would it be bad to segregate vaccinated and unvaccinated? Seems like that would incentivize people to vaccinate, yet it also creates a divide. Yeah, these are all really great comments. And, I mean, kind of going back to the very first comment about people are making decisions based on non-scientific sources. Well, again, it goes back to trust. You know, who do they trust? And we can say, well, that's not scientific. You're not, you know, you're not looking at the right sources until we're blue in the face. But if they don't feel like they can trust the source, they're not going to trust the source, right? So we have to accept that that may be the case. All we can do is provide information as best as we can and try to do it from a trustworthy source. But ultimately, you know, it'll be up to that individual to reflect on whether or not they do trust that information. And that is going to just continue to be a challenge going forward. And as I said, there's a lot of folks who just have that wait and see attitude, and time will tell. You know, over time, the less, you know, side effects, the less problems present with these vaccines, there's a good chance that people will feel better about them. You know, in terms of like setting boundaries, do we divide the vaccinated and non-vaccinated? I think that's really tricky. You know, I think, you know, I don't know. I don't really know if that's the answer. I think it's reasonable to say that if you haven't been vaccinated, to handle it like we handle the flu. You know, in our organization, if you don't get the flu shot, for whatever reason, you have to wear a mask during flu season. That's the boundary. And that may be the boundary that companies want to implement, is to, if you're not vaccinated, that you have to wear a mask. You could put it, you know, you could try to divide the break rooms and see what kind of effect that has. I'm concerned about things that divide people in that way. Because I think on an individual level, it's hard to process that. So there would have to really be some conversation about that. And I would want to include both vaccinated and non-vaccinated employees in that process. Like, we want to create a safe environment for everybody. Let's talk about how we do that. You know, it's not about forcing people to get vaccinated. It's about, we ultimately have to protect the entire population. So I would just, again, really want people involved in that conversation, and get their input, so that you can come up with creative ways. Is there anything else? Does anybody have any comments? You certainly are welcome to unmute yourself if you want to chime in at all. You know, when the issue of emotionally safe environment, you know, I just did something related to mental health, and one of the things that I talked about is psychological safety, right? The most important variable in creating an emotionally safe workplace is psychological safety. People need to feel like they can say what they need to say, that they can speak up without fear of being reprimanded. So this is really critical at this time, creating a psychologically safe environment where everybody has a say, vaccinated and non-vaccinated, right? That's important, so that everyone feels as though they can speak up and not be demonized, villainized, critiqued for speaking up, right? We need to encourage people to speak up. Again, that does not mean that we're all going to agree. It's not about just rolling over and letting people do whatever they want. It's about hearing from everybody and including them in the conversation. That's really critical in order for us to come up with creative ways to address the needs of both groups, you know, vaccinated, non-vaccinated. Ultimately, we're going to have to do that because we want people to go back to work, right? We want to get back to normal. Any other comments? Any other questions? I look forward to us doing these in person again, so that people, you know, feel comfortable speaking up. Just seeing, did I miss anything, Tyler? Did I get all of the questions, you think? And is there anything in the chat? I didn't look at the chat.
Yeah, no, I think you've covered all the questions that came in.
Okay. Well, I hope that's helpful. This is, you know, this is something that is going to be ongoing. You know, I would encourage you, if we're your EAP program, We're there to help you navigate this. Please rely on us for consultation. We're happy to get involved. If there are conflicts among teams related to this, that's one of the things that we do. We get involved. We can help you navigate that conflict. If we aren't your EAP, please make sure to reach out to your EAP program, because this is a great role for EAP, for the Employee Assistance Program, is to help you think through these steps, like to make these decisions about, do we have separate break rooms? I mean, maybe that is the solution, or maybe you pilot some things and see what effect that it has, and you survey your employees. Again, it's really about understanding that people are making decisions for reasons that are meaningful to them, right? We all make decisions based on what is meaningful to us, and it is important to acknowledge and respect that. So with that, if there's no other questions, thank you so much for your taking the time to be with me today. I hope this was helpful. Certainly, I think we've recorded this. It'll probably appear on our website. So if you have somebody who wants to watch it, please encourage them to check it out. Anything else? Okay, take care, everybody. Have a great day.